Hi, I'm Don Goldberg with TechView, and guest today, our very own Wyeth Ruthven, who is been working on a lot of social media activities, and we're here to actually talk about politics and elections. Not Wyeth, and thanks for being here, because we're talking about who won or lost, but really how are they using technology in these campaigns, and specifically how they use Twitter. So we've got the Massachusetts race, which was a couple weeks ago, and then late last fall we had Virginia and New Jersey. You've done a pretty extensive look at the use of Twitter by the candidates and the impact that had. So tell us kind of what prompted this and what you found.
Well, that's right. Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at Twitter and see how campaigns are using it and how that differs from how, ordinary followers, and users of Twitter are using the medium. And what I did is I took all of the tweets over a 3-month period for New Jersey and Virginia governor's races. It was the last 3 months of that campaign. For Massachusetts, it was the 3-month window between the time the candidates filed for office in November and the January special election. So it had the primary election and the general election that took place in Massachusetts. Looked at their tweets, used some of the other Twitter analytic studies have kind of categorized tweets in various ways. I kind of adapted that methodology to campaigns. So I looked at which tweets were news oriented, where they were links to external content, which were calls for action, volunteer or fundraising, give money, which were more self-promotion about here's my position on this issue, or here's where I'm going to be speaking at this this time, and which were actual more conversational, the actual social aspects of social media. One of the things that I found out is that for most campaigns, Twitter and social media is still largely a one-way medium. They were pushing a lot of content out, but they weren't interacting a lot with with their followers, with other people on Twitter. Massachusetts was actually an exception to that. For both Scott Brown and Martha Coakley, about 1 out of every 5 tweets they had was either a reply message or a retweet. It was direct communication with their followers, which is a big jump from really in New Jersey and Virginia. It was just a handful of people communicating in that way. So you can really see the medium is continuing to evolve and is actually evolving fairly quickly in that respect.
So let's talk about New Jersey and Virginia, the gubernatorial races from last fall, because I think you found that there were some things that worked and some things that didn't work, and then we can come back to Massachusetts.
That's true. I think one of the things in Virginia and New Jersey, and different campaigns had different approaches to it, but you had campaigns with multiple accounts, which tended to create message dilution. I think with Creed Deeds in Virginia, he had 6 different official accounts. The candidate had an account, senior staff had their own accounts. They created special micro accounts to handle certain issues. They had one issue for rural voters, one Twitter account for rural voters, one Twitter account focusing on Bob McDonnell's thesis, and it was really just devoted to news and information about the thesis. As a result of having that many accounts, the messages were too diffused to really break through. Creed Deeds had about 3,700 followers on his account, but only about 1% of those followers followed any of the other accounts that the campaign was trying to push information out on. So I think really having one account per campaign is the best way of doing it. That's what Bob McDonnell did. He would kind of alternate between tweets that were him personally tweeting to his followers and tweets that his staff were putting up, and they would always distinguish, which was a staff tweet, which was a tweet by the principal. And as a result of keeping everything on one account and driving people to that Twitter page, he had a lot more followers and he had a lot more reach in terms of his messages getting through.
Now, a lot of things that we talk about as communications folks is, in this day and age, you need to have lots of different tactics to reach different types of audiences, but it sounds like what you're saying, at least for political campaigns, is that if you divide and conquer that way, you're really losing the ability to penetrate to your audiences.
That's true, because I think having one of the other things about Twitter is you're dealing with people who might not be following everything about the campaign. Massachusetts is actually a good example of this. That once Scott Brown's campaign began to catch fire, not just in Massachusetts but nationwide, you saw this huge upsurge of followers going to his account. These people wanted to learn more. They didn't necessarily know where to go, but on Twitter they found his feed, and really from the beginning of January, his followers increased about 600%. In the last week of his campaign, his followers doubled just in that amount of time, and he had, you know, over 10,000 followers by the time that campaign was over, which, you know, was really phenomenal, both in terms of the number of followers and the speed at which he gained them.
So perhaps the lesson there is, if you get some sort of buzz because that Massachusetts race, you know, got a lot of attention when it looked like the Republican was going to win, which they did. If you capitalize through Twitter, you can really maximize your outreach, you know, more so than probably any other medium.
That's right. I mean, it's a scalable medium, and it's a very easy way for followers to then retweet those messages. It's a very viral medium, and I think you know, campaigns would be wise to use it in that way.
Yeah, and I'm sure as politicians, they're going to continue that conversation because that's the way they're going to keep in front of people.
That's right,
and raise money.
And Scott Brown has continued to tweet. Bob McDonnell has continued to use his account. He used it, you know, when he did his State of the Union response as well. So I mean, there's some follow through in this, that it's not just a one shot deal for these campaigns. It's part of an ongoing conversation they're having with voters.
So looking down, you know, into the 2010 elections, the regularly scheduled elections coming up this fall, if you had one lesson or one message to send to political campaigns?
I think really it's a matter of, you know, having one account per campaign, you know, encouraging calls to action, involving your followers in the everyday parts of the campaign, the nuts and bolts that win elections, and you know, using your Twitter account to kind of aggregate links to external content, you know, favorable news articles and things like that, so that the Twitter feed actually kind of becomes its own feed of information about the campaign that's been curated, you know, to put your candidate in the best possible light.
Well, Wyeth, thanks for being here, and that's a really interesting study. I think what we're seeing here is that technology like Twitter, which a lot of people are wondering, well, how do you really use this, does have serious implications and practical uses that are advantageous if they're done the right way.
That's true.
So, well, we're going to have a link to your study, you know, on the website on TechView, so people can find that. But thank you for being here.
Okay, thanks, Don.
Great. I'm Don Goldberg for TechView.